Jessica Chung Boling in Andong, South Korea. As of late, I was working on the Biden-Harris campaign for the last 6 months or so. I was doing the Asian American Pacific Islander outreach in Wisconsin. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I've been doing. It's a really busy time, not really thinking about anything else. The campaign was 100% my life at that point. I really like that we're engaging the Asian American community for the first time, like politically in Wisconsin, and I got the chance to build up and mobilize the community. And just to get to know all the different communities that are there, it's pretty diverse, and learn more about them and help them feel more empowered in their voice and representation throughout the political process in the United States. So as of recently, I have been participating with an adoptee group out of Portland. It's called Reunited, and they are working to do political activism related to Black Lives Matter and then also adoption issues. So we've been meeting since the George Floyd murder and just starting to build a foundation and figure out where we want to go and how we want to advocate for adoptee issues and then the Black Lives Matter issues. Besides that, I try and get together with adoptees in Milwaukee every once in a while, grab some dinner, stay in contact. Every once in a while, I'll get an adoptee that wants to, think about doing a birth family search or something like that, and I'll meet with them and talk to them about different aspects of it and what my process was like and what it's like to go over there and any tips that I might have. I was born in 1984. And I really don't know very much about what happened in Korea. I was adopted at 4 months, so I don't really have any memory of Korea. I mean, I've heard the story. I've reunited with my birth parents, and so I've heard a few different stories of what happened that I'm aware of. So I was adopted to a small town in Washington, Coopville, Washington. It's about a population of, a few thousand people. And I have 2 older brothers that are biological of my parents, and then I have 1 younger sister that's adopted from South Korea as well. And I grew up there, spent, all the way till high school in this small town, mostly white, and it's a working class farming town. So very, very quintessential American life where you had a football team, and a homecoming king and a homecoming queen and cheerleaders, and just if you were to think small town America, this would be small town America. Yeah, my parents had 2 kids, and during the second pregnancy, my mom had a lot of complications with the birth and the pregnancy, and so she couldn't have kids anymore. And so they decided to adopt me, and then afterwards they realized that I would be quite lonely growing up because I'm significantly younger than my older brothers, and so they adopted my sister as well. So I think I realized that I was a little different when I was in kindergarten, and we had to do things about your middle name. So everyone, you're learning about your middle name in class, and then everyone had to go by their middle name for a day. And so my middle name is my Korean last name, Chung. And so when I noticed that mine was just really, really different, it made me feel like I really stuck out, and it made me, not want to stick out and, have a white last name like Anne or Elizabeth or something like that. So I think that's when I started to really recognize it. And then there was another time in class where we had to talk about what color hair we had and if it was the same as our parents or not. And my hair is not the same color and my eyes are not the same color as my parents. So I think that was another point where I realized, I am different. I am different from my family, and I am different from other people in this classroom in the fact that I don't have the same eye color or hair color as my parents. My parents are, older because they adopted me when they're older. So they grew up in a generation where they're very stoic and don't really talk about feelings or think about, psychological aspects of being adopted or necessarily what it means to be the only Asian person in your class. So we never really talked about that growing up. And I think that was something that was missing. I think I wish I would have had more space to talk about that and explore that, because I think I internalized a lot of, what was said to me and the differences between me and my classmates. But it's not like my parents were bad parents. They provided for us. They were there. They came to my sports games. I don't really think my parents treated us differently, and I wouldn't really know because like my brothers were so much older than me, and so I didn't get to see how they were raised. My brothers say that we were more spoiled than them because my parents had been, working longer and had hit their stride in their careers and were making more money and were able to provide more for us. But I've never felt like I was not their daughter. I think my parents were really good about, thinking about others and, providing for others. So we had a lot of exchange students when I was growing up from all over the world. We actually had a Korean exchange student for a little bit. And I think, providing those opportunities, we also had some of our friends stay with us when things were really hard for them and with their families. And so I think that taught me, to care for other people and to give back. And I think, with the, exchange students, they taught me to really appreciate other cultures. And I think I'm really grateful because I grew up in such a small town where a lot of people don't ever leave the small town, but they exposed me to different cultures. So I would have like this yearning to get out of the small town, see the rest of the world. And I'm thankful for that because I have gone out and seen the world. So I think I've always known that I want to, search for my birth parents. It comes up when you tell people you're adopted from a very young age. They always ask you, do you want to go back to Korea? Do you want to search for your birth parents? There's a set of questions that come up. So I've always thought about looking for my birth parents. It wasn't till I was in college and then that I really started thinking about it. And then grad school is when I was like more committed to it, but I didn't feel ready. And so I think maybe when I was 25 is when I really made the decision to look. They know that I reunited with my birth father, but they don't know any of the details and anything about it. Because when I searched, it was so tumultuous and it was really painful for me to express that I wanted to search and the reasons why I wanted to search, and then to have them not really be receptive to that, and then almost be like thought that I was like breaking up the family because I wanted to do that. I've never told them about it because I wanted to be my own story that they can't have say over. I think my parents felt like, although they have never said this outright, but I think this is what they felt. That they felt like my mom thought that I was looking because there was like a hole in me that I need to feel like whole with, or she felt like that I was being ungrateful to the family, or I think she felt insecure that I wanted to go and search for my birth parents, whether they'll admit that or not. So I tried to find my papers originally from my parents, but they had lost my papers. So I had to go to the adoption agency in Seattle, and they asked for more information from the Korean adoption agency to see if there was more in my file. There wasn't. And so then the next step was to write a letter to my birth mother and send it over and then see if she would respond. And then I decided to go and continue the search in South Korea. And the first step was to go to the adoption agency. I was adopted from Eastern Adoption Agency and go through my file review process. And so I met with a social worker, and she told me that my mother no longer lives at the address that's been registered to the government. And so I had really just hit a dead end. They speculated that something was wrong and that, she might be in trouble, and that's why she didn't reply. So that was really, really frustrating to go through. And I pretty much had given up at that point to finding my birth parents. And I knew that was a possibility. I know that the percentage of actually finding your birth parents is really low. So I had given up, and that was probably around November or so, because I came to Korea in November, and then in January they emailed me out of the blue and said, we found your birth father and you have 2 half-siblings and he wants to meet you next week. It was really out of the blue and unexpected, and I was like very skeptical. I said, where did you get, first of all, like you never hear about people reuniting with their birth father, usually birth mother. And I said, well, where did this name come from? Like, is this real? Like, I don't think, like, why didn't you have this before? Why didn't you tell me about it before? I don't know if I can trust this. And so they explained that my aunt's name was on there and that they contacted her, and then they contacted my birth father to reunite. I picked a date to meet with my birth father, and I went to the adoption agency and went through that process. It was probably one of the most surreal experiences that I've ever had, because it's something that you've dreamt about for so long, and then it happens, and it's obviously not going to match up with whatever you think it would be. And so, yeah, to go through that was just really weird, and I think it'll always be weird to think about. And it was interesting because I wasn't allowed to take a translator from my end to translate everything, so I had to rely on the adoption agency, which made me feel really uneasy because they've been so secretive, and they really wanted me to show my love for my birth father, but I'm like, I don't know him. He's a complete stranger. Like, how can I love him without knowing him? And it was really weird because I really tried to force that process on us. I think he was a little hurt because I had written to my birth mother. I think it was my birth mother. And so they had only seen that letter, and so they're like, oh, we think that you really must want to meet your birth mother, but it's just because I had never thought that it was a possibility to meet my birth father. One thing that stood out to me is that he looked like me. We have similar cheekbones, and then we talked a little bit about our personalities. One thing that I had read in my adoption file is that my mother was very shy and not very outgoing, and so I'd always wondered where my outgoing side had come from. And my birth father talked about his personality and, you know, what he's like, and I, you know, it was very clear that it came from that side of the family and not necessarily my mother. So I think that was really validating to hear and learn about. I think, yeah, I just said, yeah, hi. It's really hard. I should have written down everything that I said and what happened, but it just all happened so quickly. My father did not talk a lot at all. He was so quiet during the experience. When we met at the adoption agency, he just sat there and was very tense. So also my birth father was kind of high up in Korea. So in the Korean government, he worked for Korail as a finance director. So he was very nervous about being seen, I think, and very nervous about, you know, the shame of like having a child out of wedlock. So I think that led to him feeling tense. And then, you know, after we met at the adoption agency, we went to dinner, and he, you know, lightened up a little bit more and talked a little bit more. And then after that, we went to one of the large department stores, and because he wanted to take me shopping and buy me all this stuff and, you know, treat me like a daughter. And that was not what I was expecting at all. It felt almost like you're trying to buy my love, but, you know, I wasn't gonna complain. So he bought me a very expensive jacket and some clothes because he thought my jacket didn't seem warm enough. It's funny because he wanted me to get really girly stuff, and I was like, not really my style. And then he asked if we could go for a drink somewhere, and so we went to this cafe, which actually happened to be the place where my ex and I had our first date. So it was really interesting. Then when we had like a drink or two, then my birth father just like opened up in a completely different way, and he was just talking about how he felt so tense in the meeting at the adoption agency and felt like he couldn't really express himself. And now that we're like out in the open and talking, like he just opened up and talked more about how he always wanted to have a daughter and that he wanted to treat me like a princess and like buy all this stuff for me, and you know, that he loved me so much and just a lot of stuff. And he started crying, and I was like, wow, this is like a lot. Like I wasn't expecting all this, but it was like touching and maybe like what you would imagine your reunion experience would be more like, as opposed to when we're at the adoption agency, where it was really like just almost sterile feeling because it was so formal. And so that was very emotional, like very, very emotional for me. And I guess I could feel like his remorse for like what he did, or regret. Not that I think that he would do it any differently, but I could feel that, like when we were talking, that he felt very guilty. But yeah, it was a lot of emotions. You know, we still, you know, cacao talk every once in a while, maybe once a year or something like that, and send some pictures. It's hard because I don't have the Korean language, so I've tried to learn it. It just, you know, it takes a lot of time, and I haven't had a lot of time recently to do that. So the ironic part is that his wife is an English teacher, and he could just use his wife to help him with that. But because he doesn't want his family to learn about me, he'll never be able to get that help. I should probably, I have friends that speak Korean, use them to translate stuff, to talk more. But it's almost like, what can we talk about? So it's interesting because, and this is some of the things that really made me frustrated, is that they gave my birth father her address, but not me, and let him deal with it with however he wanted. I asked my birth father to help me find my birth mother, and he said he would, but I don't think that he will, because I think he's afraid of what the repercussions could be like. Reconnecting with my birth mother and her family, and if it could jeopardize his family and his career. I had learned through a translator, because he didn't tell me directly, that shortly after he took a high position in the government, my birth mother's family showed up at his office and blackmailed him for money, apparently. And so he had to pay them off to have them stay quiet. And so I think he's worried about them coming back and doing that if he tries to help me find my birth mother. So I don't know if I will. If I go back to Korea, I'll try again. My feeling is that she probably doesn't want to meet me, because it's probably a painful time in her life, and she probably has done a lot of effort to, not look back in that, and probably has a family of her own. I did have some resentment, like when he told me that he asked for an abortion. I didn't know if I felt like resentment, but more just like sad. Like, this wasn't circumstantial. Like, you really didn't want to have a child. So I felt angry about that. I feel more resentful to the Korean government and how they handled it, and the adoption agencies and how they continue to handle it, because they didn't really think about it, and they just, did whatever they could to get kids out of Korea without really any foresight for what they're doing. And then the way that they've handled us coming back hasn't been the greatest either. So most of my resentment goes to the Korean government, because I feel like if the government was set up better, then maybe this would not have happened the way that it did. Adoption's really complicated, that it's not a one-time transaction, that it comes with a lot of, great things, but also challenging things that, don't go away after you're adopted, that you have to, think about. You don't have to think about, but if you don't think about it, then you're probably, in denial about a few things. So I think just understanding that it's complicated and it's a journey, and that we need to work to better understand that journey and better support adoptees as they, go through that process.